we would like to take a quick moment to have each panelist introduce themselves, where they are, what they're up to, and if you have a moment to share your reflection of what you saw in the poll, or perhaps what you feel like might be missing from the framework that we are grounding in today. Shaine, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. Hi, my name is Shaine. I'm a senior at Germantown Friends School. I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And something that I saw that I found interesting was the idea about belonging being a challenging one. And I think that can be hard, and especially just in like regular school, when you're required to take a class, you might not always be fully engaged in that class, and you might not feel like you belong in that class, which is why I like being able to choose my classes, and like GOA allows that. So that's something I found interesting.
Thanks, Shaine. How about you, Cory?
Yeah, my name's Cory Henwood. I'm the Innovation Director at Iron County School District, which basically means I get to work with all new programs of opportunity and innovation for students in our district and with teachers implementing those programs. I also get to do some of that with others, new school models throughout the country, and some of my work outside of the district. I really am compelled by this idea of value in the work that we do. And maybe it's my background previously having been a math teacher, where students ask, when am I ever going to use this? These types of things. I want the students to feel empowered and feel like they value the learning that's taking place in their learning space, and that it can help them to achieve future success. So that's something that's intriguing to me. I look forward to talking about more.
Thanks, Cory. Eric?
Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Hudson, Chief Program Officer at GOA. Happy to be here. So nice to see all of you. You're catching me at kind of afternoon sunlight hour. I live on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And something that struck me in those poll results was kind of the spread of responses. It seems like there was no one thing that felt really successful and no one thing that felt really challenging. And I just kind of want to hold on to that as a reminder that student engagement is complex and very personalized and very context specific, and sort of, we kind of need to approach this as not seeking one single solution, but rather a toolkit of questions and possible strategies. And thanks for having me.
Thanks, Eric. And last but not least, Katelyn.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I am Katelyn Williams. I am the middle school counselor at Greensboro Day School, and I am also an introduction to psychology teacher for GOA. It is dismissal at my school where I am, so pardon the noise. And I am also about 8 months pregnant, so pardon me if I lose breath at any point in this discussion today. But I kind of feel similarly to Eric, that I noticed that there was kind of a widespread of things. And I know that when I first look at this list, I feel that they're all important. And I also wonder, okay, well, if I want to solve any of these issues, where do I start? It can be overwhelming to feel like we need to do all of them at the same time. But it's also just as important to start somewhere. I also think that they feed off of each other really, really well. And so if you're starting with one thing, some of these things are going to fall into place. So starting somewhere is important, and it's okay if you're not sure where to start. We'll figure that out together.
Thanks, Katelyn. And Eric and Katelyn, that's a great reminder of how we got to this conversation. So in our work at GOA, we work with an expansive network of schools across the world. And in those conversations with educators, through our course conversations with students, we see this challenge of engagement and people asking a lot of questions about authentic student engagement. And the purpose of today is obviously not to solve all of it, but as Katelyn mentioned, to have a starting point, and everyone's starting point is different. So the first question really is that, in your context, from where you sit, what is one mindset that you feel is developing well? And very specifically, what is being done to generate that mindset in your context? Specific, so that somebody on this conversation today can walk away and say, oh, I can see how I might start to take that on, or just start to implement some aspects of that. I see Eric deep in thought, so I'm going to start with Eric.
Yeah, sure. So I think coming from the GOA perspective, as Krista mentioned, we've been around for 12 years, and the mindset that we were kind of founded on was probably the one this work has value for me. Our catalog of student courses was designed and continues to be focused on passion-based courses. And what are offerings GOA can give to students that allow them to tap into interests they have beyond the core academic program and in the world beyond school. And I think one thing, I've been at GOA for almost a decade, and one of the things I've really learned about all these mindsets, but especially that one, is to simply ask students questions and listen to the answers. And so when we ask students, what do you want to learn? Or what about this experience that you just had has value to you? GOA has surveyed our students regularly. We host focus groups with students. We have a student advisory council. We really just try to make student voice a prominent part of decisions we make around offerings and strategy and how we design learning experiences. And I think this question of value can feel very abstract. And so a place to start is to simply ask students, what do you value? And then do your very best to listen to what they tell you.
Katelyn or Cory or Shaine, do you have anything to respond to that? Or anything of your own you would like to add?
Yeah, I can my piece dovetails off that. Certainly this idea that the work has value for me, as I mentioned earlier, is intriguing, as well as, do students feel like they belong, to Shaine's point. And a couple of things we've been doing in our area to try to help that happen is, one, to ask, not just our students and our teachers, the folks that we work with day to day, but also the parents and our community leaders. What are the things that students need to be most successful in the future? When our students and our parents hear that from business leaders and post-secondary leaders, they understand that these are the things that are going to be most valuable to them. They feel like that idea of attainment of these skills is really purposeful. And that's what we've kind of culminated in our Portrait of a Graduate at our school, our Iron Essential 8 throughout our district. That piece has led us to providing more experiences for students that help them to develop those skills and ultimately achieve those skill sets, that things, like collaboration and communication skills and creative thinking skills. And so part of the way we help students to belong is we value their passions and we value the things that they want to make a change in. And we propose projects that are co-designed with them. In particular, at Launch High School, a school that sits behind me, is a space where students work with an advisor one-on-one or in small groups to come up with this type of purposeful project, whether that's, rehabilitating. We had a rather large forest fire locally and rehabilitating some of the animal habitats there, or whether it's working with our local Paiute tribe of Utah Indians to develop kind of relationships between the youth and the elders of that tribe, or even doing something as simple as starting their own business, lunch delivery service, when they're dissatisfied with the lunch options at the school. So whatever it is that's purposeful to them, helping them to go through a process that builds those skill sets and takes on meaningful work, really helps them to, one, feel that they belong, and two, feel that their work has value. And that's some of the things we've done to build that.
So Eric and Cory, you both talk about this idea of sort of student voice, right? And starting with the question, what is it that you want to learn? What do you need to be successful? And in some ways that feels like obvious, but that doesn't mean it's not hard. So I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about what are the challenges you've faced or seen as people try to engage their community with that question and make that the case, and how you overcome those or trade-offs that you've made.
Or you go ahead.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Just one piece that I've seen some difficulty with, we have teachers who are, subject matter experts and have taught for many years in a particular system. And then when they depart from that, to maybe take a little bit more emphasis on these more transferable skill sets or on the work that students find valuable, sometimes that separation can be challenging. So providing bridges that connect both their content to the things that are valuable to students and these transferable skill sets has been part of the work that I've helped map out with educators, so they don't feel like they're abandoning the competencies they've once tried to attain with their students for a whole other set, but that there's a lot of crossover in those pieces. So that's one area of transition that's helped. And focusing more on who we teach than what we teach has been a bit of a transition for folks. But really, that's the place where learning becomes relevant. It becomes, a place that they can retain that learning, and it becomes meaningful and memorable for them.
Yeah, I love that shifting to who we teach from what we teach. I think that's a really valuable sort of concise way to phrase it. And I have some thoughts, but I would really invite, Shaine, if you've got any thoughts about a moment when you felt your voice was really heard at school, I think that'd be really helpful to share as well. But for me at GOA, I think it is a sort of shift in mindset around what role do we want students to play in learning experiences? We talk a lot at GOA around students as partners or co-designed experiences. And one of the reasons we, kind of like Cory was talking about, shifted towards moving towards competency-based learning was when you sort of get clear about the durable, transferable skills you're working towards developing your courses, that actually creates space for students to make more active choices about what kind of content they want to explore, what pathways they might take towards those skills. And so it becomes less about sort of prescribing a certain kind of content to students and more about articulating with them a skills-based goal and engaging them in conversation about ways in which they might develop that skill in a way that reflects a subtopic they're interested in, or a subfield of, say, psychology, which I know Katelyn teaches, that they might be interested in. And so I do find that competency-based learning does create that kind of space for some more conversation and active student voice in things.
Thanks, Eric. Katelyn, I see you nodding vigorously, and Shaine, would love to hear from you as well.
Well, I do agree with this point about value and students being engaged. They really have to value their work that they're doing. And I think that ways that this has been done at my school, I think when I feel most engaged and value the work, I think usually it's the teacher trying to not just lecture at us, but try to use discussion-based learning. I think that is always something that I value, to hear other people's opinions and perspectives. So that is something that keeps me engaged.
I think I always think about, like, when I think about student voice, a question we ask students sometimes is, do you feel seen and heard? And then the follow-up to that is, do you also feel understood? And I think that the valuable work, or creating work that they see value in, comes from the second part. Like, yes, I feel like they heard me and I had a chance to say what I needed to say, so I used my voice, but was I understood? And was there actually a change in my environment as a result of what I shared? One of the things, and it all connects really nicely, when I think about our counseling department at my school, uses the framework of autonomy, belonging, and competence, the ABCs, And it helps us to think about students in terms of they want to have some type of autonomy and independence and what they're able to contribute. They have to feel like they belong and they're connected in some way. And then they have to feel like they can do it and they all are connected. And when you teach students and you're missing even one of those pieces, it's really noticeable in the way that they show up. What I try to work on really, really hard in my role here and in GOA is the belonging piece. I've noticed in counseling and also in GOA that you get so much more out of students when they feel like they belong in their classroom space and when they feel like they're connected to their instructor. And I used to think that belonging meant, okay, do they have to have something in common with a lot of people, or do they have to have something in common with me? I'm not going to have something in common with every student, but it's really just that they feel like you're invested in them and they feel that they can invest in you. And so when I think about belonging that way, we've seen complete turnarounds and shifts with students that a lot of teachers maybe had wanted to or had considered writing off as not going to engage, not able to engage. And you see what is able to come out of them when they invest in that type of engagement. We had a student that was really struggling at our school, and their parent actually had a great idea that we are now going to implement in a variety of ways, that the student just didn't feel very connected to their teachers. It wasn't that the teachers weren't paying attention. It wasn't that they weren't loving and caring, but they just weren't feeling connected. And so the parents' recommendation was have that student interview their teachers about their interests. The student comes up with the questions. They interviewed all of their teachers on their own time. And it was just so that they could have a chance to see their teacher as a human and not their science teacher, and not the principal and not X, Y, and Z. And of course, everyone was willing to do that. At the end of it, the student had a better idea of their teachers, but the teachers also had a better idea of that student. And the output of that student changed drastically. And it was amazing to see what they were actually capable of because they were invested in the process. I want to be here now. I want to hear what you have to say because I know you as a person that likes to watch The Walking Dead, and I like that too. You're not talking about that in class every time, but I trust that you care about me besides these moments that we're in class together. And so it just shows that all the pieces really are connected. When you look at the value and success and belonging, they all go together in really beautiful ways.
I love that specific example, Katelyn, and coming from like sort of a different angle. So thank you for sharing that. There was a question in the chat, which is perhaps related to belonging, but also more broadly related to this idea of voice and choice, from Erin O'Connell. And her question is really about balance. How do you balance and bridge the idea of voice and choice for an individual and the fact that all these individuals are a part of a community of learners? So how do you hold those two things together?
I mean, I'll share something that GOA teachers have taught me a lot about collaboration, kind of in the spirit of offering a specific example. Is they talk a lot about we as a community of learners collaborate on process, but maybe not as much on product. And so even if students are pursuing individualized projects, and I'm not saying that individualized projects should define every learning experience, but I think if you are designing a learning experience where you want students to pursue personal interests or passions, what are moments in the learning process where students can come together to connect and share their work with each other? So things like peer feedback, things like exhibitions of learning, things like discussions, as Shaine brought up, where rather than working together to create a product together, you are all creating your own products that reflect your passions, but you're working together in community through a learning process that involves transparent and open discussion and reflection and feedback, and later exhibition and celebration of our individual work. And that shift for me has been really powerful because I completely believe in the idea of students having voice and choice and agency in learning process. But as we all know, humans are social and learning is social. And so you do have to think about how those two things can interact with each other. And I found that process not product, collaborative mindset to be really helpful.
That's a really great distinction, Eric. This idea that everybody can engage in the process, even if how they're applying it to their own outcome is a little bit different. Does anyone else want to address that question a different way? Katelyn or Cory or Shaine?
My comments are similar to Eric's in a lot of ways, because that's what we see at our school as well. So maybe that reinforces the same point. But in a slight tangent on that, the idea of shared outcomes that we want to see, and when I'm talking about outcomes, I'm really talking about more of those transferable skill sets that I was alluding to earlier. Those types of opportunities like Shaine was mentioning around collaboration and discussion, and then these skills that we want to see our students attain can be reached in so many different ways. And so we don't need to pigeonhole them on what exactly they're going to be assessed on, and the way they need to do it, the path they need to take to get there, if the outcomes are similar. And that allows for us to feel like we're all going in the same direction, although we may take different paths and work on different products in order to get there. And I think that's really valuable to a lot of students when they see that the end outcome is valuable, the path they get to choose is personalized, and that allows them to feel like they belong.
This is Ikram Easton. If I can add one more thing, I'm from GOA. I just want to tap back to Cory's point earlier about teachers being the subject matter experts, which is so true, but I feel that engaging students start also with the curriculum planning, with the themes of each modules. You can still get to the same outcome and the same competency level, but instead of having, for example, I teach Arabic, and instead of having a unit about, at the post office, I am thinking, who is learning? How many people, how many teenagers are going to actually to the post office? Instead, I put a unit about climate change, or building your own, dream house, so they can actually feel that they are heard, and at the same time, it's very exciting for them. So it starts with the curriculum planning, diversifying the themes in modules, making them feel like they are valued, recognize their work. I feel they feel that help them engage more with each other's, planning the themes with, the assignments, if you want to call it, or the competency at the end of the unit or the discussion, to be partners work where they can actually give feedback to each other. It's just so exciting to make that connection with them, because it serves both ways, the students and the teacher at the same time.
Thank you for adding that. Okay. So one more question before we move to a second broader question from Judy, which I think is really interesting, which is, as Judy wrote it, do you find adults want this type of conversation and discussion about learning more or less than teens or 20-year-olds? So there's the conversation that the students and learners are having, and then there may be this other pedagogical high-level conversation that the adults are having. And to what extent do you feel that those things are connected or not? I don't know that we have
Yeah, Judy, please let me know if I'm not understanding the question. But something that I was thinking of when Katelyn was talking about the ABC framework she uses with students is that you really should be using that same framework with adults in your community. And Katelyn, you might also be as well. But there's this great book from many years ago called The Students Are Watching by Ted and Nancy Sizer. And it's the idea that students are looking at the implicit cultural cues in a school to understand what the school values. And so they may go to assembly, they may read the handbooks and all that stuff, but what they're really looking at is the day-to-day, minute-to-minute ways in which adults in the community are modeling certain values and certain behaviors. And so, Judy, when I see your question, I think about like, well, what type of learning and what type of autonomy and what type of belonging and what type of competence are adults in a school community experiencing? And how might those things reflect the kind of experiences we want for students? And Judy, please let me know if I'm not, answering your question.
Thanks, Eric, for taking that one on. So please continue. Oh, there's another question here, and I think since there are questions, we're going to take them now. Feel free to keep populating. We'll also make some time at the end. From Nathan Shields, what are some examples of student voice and choice? What examples of student voice choice are there for mathematics and science at the high school level? I've established contextual connections as a strategy for ensuring core content is covered in history coursework while enabling voice and choice. However, I struggle to provide my math and science colleagues with concrete frameworks or examples to assuage their concerns that voice and choice may lead to learning gaps. So I think specific to math and science at the high school level.
Mentioning I'm the math teacher is going to come back to haunt me. And I know
Yeah.
No, I love this question, and it's a great one. I think that one of the things we need to look at when we're trying to provide these types of experiences for students that can be highly personalized is, sometimes math and science seems very narrow, seems very focused on a particular procedure or whatnot. And there are also standards in both the math and science cores from NGSS or from Common Core that allow you to look at more enduring practices. So the math practices, for example, or the science and engineering practices of those cores. And those are much more transferable skill sets that you can align and have students engage in, for example, the design and engineering process when they go through and learn those same types of skills that they would be required to learn in science, or make models of learning in mathematics, or critique the reasoning of others in a mathematics classroom. And so I think that's important to allow yourself to focus also on those broadly enduring pieces that allow you to personalize, in addition to maybe offering some choice around things that are highly specific, like a vertex formula of a quadratic. And, we can look at catapults or trebuchets, or you can look at, a basketball shot and look at different ways that students may be pulled in different directions and have that type of choice, even in those more narrow spaces. So a couple of different ideas there.
I just want to elevate, I'm sorry, I just want to elevate what Matthew put in the chat around UDL. I think one thing that I would just really encourage folks to do is explore UDL as a way to kind of reframe this idea that voice and choice is kind of separate from learning, when in fact they are deeply connected. And I think UDL is a great way to kind of concretize that framing, which is there is no learning without voice and choice.
Thank you for sharing those resources. And last question before we move on is perhaps for Eric, because you are well-versed in this, which is the connection to MTC, the Mastery Transcript Consortium, and the work underway there. And what's the connection to having students recognize and celebrate those competencies as potentially expressed that way?
Yeah, with a caveat that I don't work for MTC, but I'll do my best. So, the mission of the Mastery Transcript Consortium is to recognize and celebrate the individual student. It's to reimagine the reporting mechanisms that we use to share who students are and what they know. And that's very tied to some of the fundamental principles of competency-based learning. I mean, I think it's just important to know that competency-based education was founded as an equity movement in recognition that sort of the traditional system of American education does not serve all students, especially those from marginalized communities. And I think the Mastery Transcript Consortium is trying to extend that work by thinking differently about how we report on learning and how we think about learning. And so this question around engagement is based, the connection I see between the MTC and engagement is that when we give students the opportunity to personalize pathways according to durable and transferable skills, they will be more engaged. And when we give students the authentic opportunity to contribute their voices to learning experiences, they will produce better work. That's kind of the theory of the case here. And so, you know, the ideal state of competency-based learning, to be very concrete about it, is at the end of a learning experience or the end of a chapter in a student's school life, they stand before an audience of teachers, peers, community members, and they can talk about their learning using the language of competencies and using the evidence of their own work to kind of make their own argument that they have learned and they're ready to move on to the next stage of their careers. And I think this idea of engagement leading to empowerment, leading to lifelong success is really kind of the arc that MTC is trying to make a little bit more possible. And I think is really, it does begin with a lot of the kind of day-to-day engagement strategies that we're talking about here. It's you really do need to believe that actively engaging students in the learning process really does produce the kind of, you know, human beings we want to see in the world, to try not to be too grandiose here, but like I do think that's how MTC fits into this.
And just to append on that quickly, because on that vision that Eric was sharing, you know, two of the schools I oversee utilize the Mastery Transcript and send those transcripts. And part of the way this ends up working out is those schools have identified those outcomes, those larger competencies that I've been talking about, and then highlight advanced or foundational credit areas that would be a place where students could showcase whatever evidence they've decided to work on, whether it's through a project or through a writing piece or whatever it is that meets that criteria. And then ultimately those more holistic pieces of evidence that showcase the student's ability and the skills they've learned, to Eric's point, that they want to share with their post-secondary aspirational schools, they can do that through the Mastery Transcript instead of just being reduced down to a numerical GPA. So it's a powerful shift and a great tool for system change in our profession. So
I think in some ways that's a good recap of the conversation we've had, right? I think we've heard a lot about this idea of it's about the who we teach and not the what we're teaching them. And as we think about the what is a bit different, right? It's not a specific standard as traditionally defined. It's much more about these transferable skills and competencies that students will own and take with them wherever they may go from there. And I appreciate that there have been very specific examples in this dialogue as well about what students and educators do to promote those mindsets, whether it be belonging or achievement in their environments. The one last thing we wanted to hear from our panelists, given that we're lucky to have them all in one space, is there's a lot being written, obviously, now about student engagement and success. And we also know that at the end of the year, there's always a lot written about trends in education, right? What are the new hot topics? And so we're curious from your perspective, Eric, Cory, and Katelyn, when you think 1 to 3 years out, so not too far out, because nobody could really understand that anyway, what are some trends that you're paying attention to that you feel will affect student engagement and student success?
Should I go first?
Sure.
Okay. I'll tackle artificial intelligence. So, you know, everyone's talking about AI, generative AI, right now. And, you know, I think it wouldn't be a webinar right now if we didn't talk about it. So I think that there's something really powerful about the potential of artificial intelligence to do the kind of personalized learning work we've been talking about on this call. And I would cite a teacher I heard on a podcast a couple months ago who is a department chair, she's an English teacher in Oregon, and she said, we really need to reframe our conversation of AI, and we need to stop thinking about it in terms of cheating and start thinking about it in terms of assistance. And I think that's a really powerful way to think about how artificial intelligence might empower students to begin to pursue more personalized learning pathways. And so something I'm really paying close attention to is the ways in which we talk to students about artificial intelligence, the way we as educators learn about and use artificial intelligence ourselves, and what it enables us to do that we couldn't do before, and how we might really kind of maximize the idea that we all have a very powerful assistant at our fingertips who can help us learn at the pace we need to learn at, or learn the things we want to learn more deeply, or get the feedback we need when we need it. These are all really exciting questions for me, specifically around like what artificial intelligence might enable over the coming years.
Thanks, Eric. I think it's, like anything that's new can be scary, and it creates camps, right? One versus the other. So it's interesting to see how those conversations have evolved, and to see some institutions, whether they be at the secondary or post-secondary level, take different actions and see how those are playing out, because they will help define how others will take action. Cory or Katelyn?
Now you've got my mind training about AI, Eric. That's really interesting. Our school is trying to make some decisions here, and we'll see which direction we end up going in, but I agree there's a lot of possibility there. I think that something that's been on my mind just because of the counseling world that I live in is kind of just the state of our kids after COVID. And I think we've heard a lot about that recently. And it's interesting because all I had ever heard for a while was that the kids are really struggling, and that the kids they're all struggling. All their mental health is out of whack. All of them are a mess right now, and we need to support them. And there's a lot of research that hasn't come out yet, and that we won't see for years to come as we really start to study where kids were at the time that COVID hit and how it affected specific age groups. I think we'll see that for years to come. There are definitely areas that I see kids have lost social skills because of what they weren't a part of at certain times. And but we've also had a few guest speakers on our campus in the past couple of years that have had real anecdotal experiences where they can say, some of these kids really are doing okay. And I don't think that's a conversation that we've been having, is that some kids really thrived in COVID. They were able to spend more time with their families. They were able to discover passions that they had. They were able to take time to sit and be still and slow their schedules down. And some of our kids really are doing okay. And some of our kids really do need extra support. And so not making these broad general statements about COVID did all of this to all of our children, just like it didn't do one specific thing to any of us as adults. And so I'm really interested to see where specific kids land based on their experience and based on what they learned and gained, or maybe what they lost over a period of time, because I definitely think that falls into our laps as classroom teachers in terms of the skills that students have or don't have. We've talked a lot at my school about not making assumptions about what our students know or don't know. There's just nothing that's a given anymore. That could have been completely skipped for a couple of years for these kids. So we have to revisit some expectations. And there are some things that we are having to reteach and reinforce. And so I'm really interested to see where a lot of our students land, because I believe a lot of them can be really, really successful. And we have to help them where they are. And unfortunately, they're in a lot of different places, and it puts a lot of work on us. But I think it's only, it only helps us by knowing the children specifically to know how to help them.
I'm really excited about the future of education. It's at an inflection point right now. That's just an exciting time to be in education. And one of the things I see on the horizon is this reckoning that educators and communities are having with what are the outcomes we'd like to see in school and in our students. And of course, that leads to some of the more transferable pieces we've been talking about. And AI is just accelerating that conversation, right? When whether, are we designing schools and systems to support students developing in a way that has them competing with machines, or using the work of machines to complement them and assist them, as Eric was saying earlier, whether that's been with the calculator or the first computers or the Google search engines. I mean, it's always been the initial reaction always been like, do we need to ban that, to lock that thing down?
I think we may have lost Cory for a minute. You got too excited.
To happen.
You're frozen. Oh, you're back.
Oh, am I back? Thank you. How can we leverage technology to help us get there? And AI as tools with personalized learning is going to help, but certainly giving our students more opportunities to engage in these types of this type of work that we've been talking about today is certainly going to help us in the future to reach those outcomes. And that's an exciting time for us in education.
Thanks, Cory. I love the positivity there. I think it has always been true, right, that the goal is always shifting. And I think with globalization, with technology, it feels like the half-life of skills gets shorter and shorter. And so figuring out where everyone's headed is in flux as the diversity of learner needs and contexts also gets more complicated. So I appreciate the optimism that we may have more tools at our disposal and more perhaps intention to support learning differently so that everyone can get to the outcome they desire for their success. So thank you, Cory, for that. The last question we wanted actually to share is with Shaine. So Shaine, you've heard the adults say all these things about learning, about engagement, about trends they're paying attention to. And we're just curious about your perspective, given that it's ultimately about students. Is there something that you feel the adults are not talking about, or you wish that the adults would talk about more?
I don't think I have anything that I think they aren't talking about, but I think some really great points were made. I think the point that Katelyn made about teachers being invested and that really engaging students. I know I enjoy class more and enjoy the work more when I know the teacher is also invested in what they're teaching and is also invested in me as a student and cares about how I'm doing and if I'm doing well with the work and is available to me, things like that. Also, the point Eric made about asking students what they want, I think that's really valuable. And I think if you want your students to be best engaged, you have to ask them what they want. And I also think that the class will be more productive and the teacher will also enjoy the class more if all the students are engaged. And I was thinking about how English and history, that's more discussion based. And so we can all be engaged and we can all take it in different directions. But someone made a point about math and science and how that's a little straightforward and it's kind of hard to go about. And I think just trying out different teaching styles and different techniques and then asking your students what works best for them could keep them engaged. And maybe trying to add and I'm taking advanced bio right now and just trying to add we're learning about viruses and we each had to do a presentation, but we got to choose our own virus that we thought was interesting. So things like that, just trying to engage your students in that way.
Thank you, Shaine. I feel like students like you always help us keep it real. and I think that you, in some ways, brought us back to the top of the conversation, which was really about just asking the question about the voice and about the choice. So thank you for reminding us of that. Well, this has been a robust conversation. It's been great to hear from everyone, and we appreciate the range of questions that have come up through the chat. And as Krista noted, we will follow up with everybody in this dialogue and folks who weren't able to make it with a recording of the session and share some resources as well. We hope that everyone will have a chance to engage with GOA. Don't be a stranger if we may be supportive in any way. And want to thank our panelists for making the time today.